We hope you enjoyed it. Next up, we have a fantastic session. So, to help us bring it in and bring up the energy, since we're right after lunch, if I could ask you to help me with a little something really quick. I know this is always like we just sat down, but could I get you folks to, if you feel comfortable and you have the energy, to stand for a moment? And we're going to bring this next one in style. Who here's a good dancer? No one? Perfect. All right, well, get ready. Next up is the session Transformation Through Storytelling, and with another all-star panel of speakers, here to welcome them after a quick dance interlude, which I hope you'll all partake in, is our session host, Statbase's head of content, Ralph Young-Pearl. Welcome. Let's hit it.
All those times I said that I love you, you lied to me. Yes, I tried. Yes, I tried. You lied to me.
Let's see those dance moves.
You know I died for you. You lied to me. Yes, I cried. Yes, I cried. Return of the man. It is. Return of the man. Come on.
Come on! Please, come on! Shake it! Shake it!
Here I am. Return of the man. Once again. Return of the man. Top of the world. Return of the man. Watch my flow. You know I love you. Here I go. So I'm back up in the days. Running things to take my swine.
Thank you very much. And since this panel is about storytelling, we hope you have some stories to tell after this panel discussion. So, did you know that storytelling actually is a basic human need? The communication theorist Walter Fisher explained that we need stories. We need to tell stories because through stories we comprehend our world, we tell our past, our future, we make relationships with stories. So that's why he said it's actually a basic human need. So we discover our world through stories. We love to tell stories, and it helps us to create culture, to evolve culture, and also to change behavior. So let me now introduce you my amazing panel here in the afternoon. So we start with Elle Bradley Cox. She's senior, of course. She's senior editorial consultant with Scarlett Abbott, and I found an amazing quote of hers on the internet. She wrote or said, "The pen is mightier than the sword, and it can pack an almighty punch." So Elle, why do we need stories, and what would life be without stories?
I think life would be devoid of meaning without stories. We need them. They're part of how we survive. It's part of how we tell our legacy. It's how we bring our children up to be better human beings. Life without stories is not worth living. In fact, Maya Angelou said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story within you." And believe me, the number of people who have said to me in the past, "I don't have a story to tell. My life's not interesting." And every single one of us has something within us that can capture the imagination. It's just how we tell it.
Thank you and welcome, Elle. Next guest is Lindsay Kohler. She's lead behavioral scientist with Scarlett Abbott as well. And I found an amazing quote, and you wrote and said, "I always advise to fall back on stories, stories, and more stories. Not only does it make something that could feel less tangible more real, but it also brings out the emotional angle, and we know emotion is a large driver of behavioral change." So Lindsay, which character in stories is the most important, and who do you see yourself?
I think that is an excellent question. And I think for the first part of it, the most important character is probably the antagonist, right? Because they're the person that's going to create that tension. They're the person that gives the protagonist something to fight against, right? It gives the protagonist that hero moment, and you can't have that if you don't have a really driven, spot-on, dedicated antagonist who's out there, like really mucking up the work. So I think that that's what adds a lot of interest and tension. And I think for the second part of your question, so which character am I, which is also really a fun one, is, well, I'd like to say I'm the hero. I mean, we should all be the heroes of our own stories, right? Like if I caught up here and said, oh, well, I think I have, sidekick potential, Well, that would be really sad. So I'd like to think that we're all the hero of our own story.
Can I have a vote for the anti-hero? Because we all are rooting for the person with the, the lowest kind of chance of winning. But I think the anti-hero.
The underdog, yeah.
Yes, that's exactly it. We're rooting for them, so I pick the underdog.
Thank you, Lindsay, and welcome. And our third and also amazing guest is Jhin Hyde. She's CEO and founder of Communique, and she once said, "Stories have heroes and villains, and they have a clear timeline. We know when the fight started and when the battle was won." So Jhin, tell me, what story is yet untold or won?
First of all, can I just say something? When Ralph dug this quote, I freaked out. Because I did not know when did I say this and where did I say it. So touche for digging and snooping into my life. Thank you for that.
The internet doesn't forget.
Well, this is the thing. If you find anything dodgy, let me know. Okay?
I will.
Okay. So, to answer your question, so I work in sustainability communications and specifically environmental, social, and governance impact. I think the story that hasn't been won yet or told effectively is what role do we play as individuals in saving the people on planet? We're very good at saying we need to do something, but no one has actually given us the guidelines and the infrastructure that we live in to bring all of these actions into place. So I think this is a story that has not been told yet effectively and hasn't been won yet.
Thank you, Jhin, and welcome. So now that you know this amazing panel, let's dive into the discussion. The first question is to the three of you. As communicators, we all heard about the power of storytelling. But what does it actually look like in the real world? And maybe you each can give us an example of how good storytelling looks like and how a good story that makes impact looks.
You have to always guide us. Who will speak when?
I'll answer first.
Okay.
I guessed, yeah. So please, Lindsay, go.
Because otherwise the three of us will speak at the same time.
I will. So Lindsay, would you like to make the... Sorry.
So I spend more time on TikTok than I'd like to admit as a grown woman. And the story that's really making the rounds right now is the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. Who's like sort of following it?
Yeah.
Few people. Yeah, and what it kind of brought out to me, and so sort of the impact of story is people are creating their own. So they're seeing it all play in real life, but the narratives that they are creating from the same, court scene that we all see playing out it's kind of amazing. And then you see, Mole making the rounds on TikToks. They've chosen their villain, right? They've chosen their hero, and it's kind of gotten out of hand. So I think that a lesson that I've kind of taken from that is, as communicators and as your leaders of your businesses, right? There's so many cameras on us all the time, and it can take just one wrong word or one wrong misstep, and they can take that clip and they put it out of context, and the next thing you know, you're trying to explain to your boardroom why you were doing X, Y, Z in an uncompromising position. So I think the power of story in that case is that we can all make our own stories, right? We can make them mean whatever we want. We can derive meaning however we want. And a story, like once it leaves, it can kind of take on a life of its own. So even within your business, once your story goes out, you don't always have full control over the narrative. So that's what's been on my mind a bit.
For me, stories in real life is conversations that we're having. So if we strip back the reason why we actually converse with each other, there's three reasons why. Number one is to connect with each other. Number two is to divide each other, because stories, as much as it brings people together, it also divides them. And number three is when we have an information that we learn and we want it to be stuck. So in my field, it's a very technical topic. And I can't retain all of this information. So what I do is I read all day, and then I sit my poor husband in a corner, and I just say, guess what? Today I have read this, and this is what I've learned from it. So that was my way of learning a new information. And what we also don't realize is that stories don't just, again, so I'm always back to basic. For me, the stories are not just stories that you tell, it's the stories that you feel. And that's our way of connecting as human beings. We touch each other's emotions. So if you tell me, for example, I've lost my dog, God forbid.
That would be so sad.
Exactly. That would be, I mean, you're the expert in behavioral science, so I'm assuming you will agree that I will be very sad. And that's how I relate to you.
I don't know that it's been formally studied in scientific journals, but
Has it
probably.
not?
Has it not? I don't
We
think
need to
so.
look into that. Okay.
Yeah, we'll verify that.
We will. So yes, so that's my take for the first question.
Thank you.
Real quick, before we go to
course.
Elle on that, can I follow up on a point that you made that I'd love your opinion on? So you'd talked about that there's kind of 3 reasons why we tell stories, which I agree with those. Do you think there's, like, and maybe it's part of connection, but do you think there's maybe a 4th element that's kind of like maybe ego and like how we want to be seen,
yes.
or what do you
Ooh.
think?
Oh, I totally agree. We always, again, from a human perspective, we want to always appear we're the best of the best, and we're the strongest in our field. So of course I have to tell my story, whether you like to hear it or not. You are listening to my story. So no, I agree with you. Absolutely, ego plays a big role.
Thank you.
And my observation is we look for the gleaming details, and those are what we remember. So maybe stories with impact, right? For me, maybe a Belgian HR director, when I asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up, she said Mick Jagger. Or maybe it's actually thinking about impact. I did a bullying and harassment campaign with a client recently, and they stepped up and said, we have a bullying problem in this organization, right? Really hard thing to stand up and say you've got, really, really hard. But because they were honest about it, and because they found people who, yeah, sure, had been bullied, but they got me to talk to somebody who's put their hand up and said, I was a bully. I recognize that now. Actually, I was going through some shit in my life. My twin brother died. Here's my story. But I stand here and say, that wasn't okay, and I've learned from it. And that's the gleaming detail.
Elle, you talked about impact. Do you 3 maybe have an example for a story that really made impact on you, or like a good example that you saw somewhere else, like a good story, like tell us in the audience. And now maybe Jhin, you could start.
I was afraid you'll say this, because I'm blanked. You start, Elle, because I need to articulate this question properly.
Well, with that particular bullying story, right, that bullying campaign, the organization actually saw a real difference because managers took ownership, and colleagues knew that there was a problem. So once you surface that problem and you realize that something's going on and you're honest about it and say, we've got a problem here, you can fix it. And there was a massive, massive change, behavioral change in that business because of it.
Yeah, and I think to stick on with the psychological safety and bullying theme, shameless plug, when I was writing my book, one of the chapters is on psychological safety, and one of the contributors, he was telling me a story that at their office on I think it was like the 34th floor, and I should probably anonymize details. So it was on the 12th floor, and so they're on this floor, and everybody was afraid to go to that floor because that's where the CEO and the executive team was. And nobody would go up there. And I just remember thinking, like, God, how can you be so afraid of anybody at work that you won't even go onto that floor? And it's just, I think, stuck with me a bit because I think it's very easy as, behavior change, and I see experts to say, psychological safety, we're going to measure it, and it's X, Y, and Z. But it's also about things like safe spaces and where do we feel safe and where do we feel unsafe. And so for me, it just helped me to view the problem through a different lens, because sometimes I can be that really annoying academic person that falls back on, well, the books say. And instead, this person's like, no, nobody will go on this floor. Like, what do the books say about that? And they say nothing because it's just never been brought to life. And I think that's part of the power of story, is it brings what your point is to life, and in a way that we can suddenly relate. If I say, lack of psychological safety, you might not know what that means. If I say nobody will go to the 12th floor because that's where the leadership team is, you all know what that means.
Yeah.
And did you notice the gleaming detail in Lindsay's story was the 34th floor, right?
What goes on the 34th floor?
I'll let you know. I'll go up.
We volunteer you as tribute.
Please do. So yes, I think the most impactful story I heard, and it affected me personally, was meeting a mum that I knew very vaguely in Marks and Spencer, where we live. And all I did, I said, "How are you? How is your little one? What are you up to?" She started talking to me about her work. And I was like, I'm by nature, whoever knows me, they know I am extremely curious. Extremely curious. I'm not nosy, I'm just curious. Sometimes. So all I've done is just ask her questions about her purpose, her emotions, just normal questions that you would do to a friend, except I didn't do it to a friend, I said it to a stranger. And then we left. We left peacefully. After a week, I bumped into her, and she said, "It's because of you, and it's because of your genuity in just asking questions, and you were interested in my life, you actually inspired me to quit my job. Because I realized through answering your questions that I hated my job. I just didn't know that. I needed that nudge. And you cemented that for me. And for that, I'm forever grateful." And now she is in the best job, and every time I see her, she always says, "I owe you my happiness." And that made an impact on me.
Wow, you
To
find
be
it
less,
amazing.
to be
Sorry.
less nosy and more curious, yes.
Curiosity is a good ability,
Yeah.
as we know. So you talked about the positive side of storytelling, but when it comes to storytelling inside of organizations, employees might also ask about the hidden meaning, the hidden message. So do you have any advice for us? So how to overcome that skepticism, or how to actually create more meaningful stories?
I can take that one.
Please go ahead.
I was just saying to someone earlier, my best friends in the organization is the skeptics. Because they are going to scrutinize my messaging before I send it out. And they're the ones I test my messaging. And especially in my field, it is so technical, it's so full of unconfirmed data. It's full of perceptions that I have to get it right. Otherwise, I will hinder I will hinder the company's reputation through greenwashing. So what I normally do is, before I send out a message, I have 4 best friends that I have, and they are the different mindset within an organization. You've got the pragmatic, AKA the skeptic. You've got the involved, who are very airy-fairy, tree huggers. They just want to save the world, so they're always going to be your advocate. You've got the calm, the person in a time of crisis, you go to them, and they will help you with all the data, and they will calm you down. And you've got the enthusiastic, the ones who are really networked in the company and know who's the most influential and how to spread the word. For me, when I always start with the skeptic, and the way I do that and ensure that my messaging, when I'm giving it or sending it to a skeptic, is that it includes data, it includes case studies that have worked, and it includes a voice of authority. Because that's the reason they're skeptics, because they don't trust us. So how do you gain their trust if you don't show them that it has worked and this is the data to back it up? And then this is where then they scrutinize it even further for me, and this is when I know I got it right, and this is how I send it out.
Do you proactively, before you test with the skeptics, do you test it on yourself first? Do you often think through, like, well, what are all the reasons why somebody might not trust me? Or did you do that type of vetting as well?
You've stolen my tip, Lindsay.
I stole your tip. Sorry,
You
this is
stole
what
my
happens when you
tip.
join a panel at the last minute and you don't
I
practice.
was going to do that as a tip. Now what am I going to do?
I'll whisper mine to you and you can use it.
Fine. In that case, you don't need to ask me what it would be the tip, and I will just say it now. Yes, the answer is right. So the way I learned how to tell a story is to write my own story. So because I'm an Arab and an African, it's very difficult that I shout my own achievements, my own accomplishment. So what I did is I did something called the life map, my life map. And I started with what are my challenges, what are my accomplishments, what are my challenges, accomplishments, turning points, okay? And where do I want to be known, or where do I want to go ahead? And I tied everything back to me as my value and my purpose. So my advice, if you want to tell an effective story, tell your story first. Write your story down, because that's how you will learn how to link your stories to values and purpose and mission.
I also think those are really great signposts, just in general, in any narrative you're working on. So those 4 categories that you just listed, I think, are a nice way to think about narrative frameworks and stories.
So how about you? How do you think we could overcome skepticism and get more meaningful stories?
So the problem is we're massively overloaded with information. It's dripping, and we're also incredibly sick of sensationalism, and in an internal audience, our skeptics are telling us that it's mainly spin. And so the problem with all of that is that we have to find a solution to get around it. And actually, my solution is constructive journalism. You may have heard of it, you may not. It's also called solutions journalism. And it's less about kind of cats saved from trees or state-run propaganda or anything like that. It's more about focusing on, okay, what are the problems here? Let's acknowledge them, like the bullying story I told you about. Let's acknowledge them up front and paint a really honest picture of what's going on. And instead of asking when something happened, ask why it happened, and then what's next, to go on to make your story more constructive, more solutions-focused, exactly to what Jhin was saying about providing the proof points, and giving people space to speak as well, because so often in internal comms do we put out top-down messages from leaders and rarely invite comments or opinion, or if comment comes in and it's a little bit tricky, we tend to delete or moderate out instead of opening up the conversation. And you can turn some of your biggest detractors into your biggest advocates if you welcome them in with open arms and say, do you know what, I hear you, you make a fair point. Should we talk about this and see how you can help us move this on?
I love that, because that I can easily implement when I am communicating environmental impact, social impact. It's so true. So thank you for telling us about it.
Pleasure.
I can also recommend the podcast, Elle, that you were on about constructive journalism, so you should hear it.
And whoever doesn't, sorry, by the way, she didn't pay me to tell you this, okay? I'll charge you later. She has, so Elle publishes this articles, and it's on Substack, which I did not know what it was until she introduced me to it. She's a brilliant writer and a storyteller, so please follow her, because it's worth it.
Thank you so much.
I wholeheartedly second that.
Yeah.
Can you please tell us the name? I also read it and I loved it, so can you
Thank you. So it's called Don't Delete the Kisses, and it is about all of the taboo stories and hidden topics that we don't talk about. So if you had a secret that you wanted to share but wanted to be completely anonymous, would you tell it, and what would it be? Come to me with your stories after.
I'll send you my list. Okay.
So let me now ask you another question. Do you think there's any missed opportunities where storytelling hasn't yet been used and where it should get actually stronger? And I would like to start with Lindsay.
Well, yes. And I was talking about this with Al earlier, not so much in the missed opportunities, but now that I see that question, I'm like, oh, it is one. So I think that we don't do a good enough job telling our own stories internally to leadership. So I hear so much chat over the past few years that, like, oh, we finally have a seat at the table. But I don't necessarily think that's true or untrue. I think it's more about who's willing to go out and ask for what they want and fight for what they want. So I think the seat at the table isn't a COVID thing. I think it's still people, team specific, and who's willing to go out there and grab what they want. And I think your own stories are your proof points. So I think that we can do a better job champion ourselves to leadership teams.
Yeah, and just as journalists, right, we're the GPS of society, IC need to be the navigation system internally, and let's forget about more information and let's make better.
I think if I hear again, and I know I will not be popular after this, if I hear again, we need a seat at the table, okay, we have to have a voice, and then, okay, fine, okay, now when you get it, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to get there? How are you upskilling yourself to get there? And this is something I talked about 2 days ago, about what role do internal communicators play in saving people and planet? And one of the things that will get you the seat in the table is to upskill yourself in that area, because this is your new reality. This is not going anywhere. And if you do that, you're going to be ahead of the curve, because no one else is ahead of the curve yet when it comes to ESG and communications. So please, if you do get a seat in the table, make sure you do upskill yourself first, and make sure you don't victimize yourself and tell your story. I agree with you.
And I think you're so right in terms of how you're framing the sustainability story. So we'll stay on that topic. And it's such a big difference to go to a leadership team and be like, I need money to communicate our sustainability strategy. Boring. You could go to a leadership team and say, I need money to upskill our people so that we understand the impact that we can make in, saving tigers. I don't know, whatever the sustainability goals are. Using less rubber, saving tigers, so on and so forth.
Saving lives.
Saving lives. It's that impact story. And I think the good thing with impact too is it's immediate and it's now and it's visceral. So I don't want to talk about climate change, but one of the problems is the timescales don't always feel relevant to people.
Yeah.
And when something feels farther off, you're like, oh, well, that's tomorrow me's problem.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's everyone's problem. So stories like you've just described, reframing it, I think, is a much more powerful and emotive way to really just get what you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you seen the climate clock counting down in Times Square?
Yeah.
Because so many of our sustainability strategies are by 2050, when actually, when you see those 7 years now, 7 years and 69 days ticking down, what a powerful message.
Let me just get back. You said you can't hear the seat at the table anymore. Do you think, and the question is to the three of you, do you think that is a hero's journey? Because we're talking about storytelling.
I think it's a victim mentality.
It's a victim mentality. It's not. There is no heroism in here at all.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, no.
It's being a bit timid, and you're playing the sidekick. As I've said earlier, we need to be the hero of our own story.
Yeah.
And I think it's a victim mentality and playing the sidekick a little too easily.
Yeah.
So let's reframe, as you mentioned, Lindsay. Maybe we'll find another approach to that story. Maybe tonight in the reception.
Talk to me after a couple of drinks when it comes to that. Okay?
I will wait. I will serve you the drinks.
Thank you. A big one, huh?
Of course.
A mega pint.
A
If
mega
any of you have
pint.
been watching the
Everything
trial.
you want.
Yeah.
Everything you
I'd
want.
like a mega pint of wine, please.
That would be great. I love you for
Of
that.
course.
You owe it to me after snooping into my life.
Well, everything is public, so don't
No,
show
I
show.
blame you.
It's all for the audience.
I have to tell my husband actually about this. He'll freak out.
I have a LinkedIn account. You can send
Do you?
him. Yeah.
Okay. Will do.
All right. We heard a lot about stories, what to do, what not to do, some advice of you, but maybe can you sum it up and give us some tips, some advice for the audience? If we leave voices after tonight, what should they do? What should they do for a good storytelling?
So for me, it's bury or when. I kind of alluded it to before, but so many internal comm stories that I read start with, recently we did this, or last week we did that, and nobody cares when you did anything. It doesn't matter. We care about why we did it, and we care about what's next. Bury the when.
I'm also going to stay on the berry theme in the spirit of optimism. I say don't bury the lead, and I know that is like storytelling 101, but I think it's very easy for us to forget what the lead is, and we do get bogged down in details like the win, and we sort of forget the heart of our story. And I think some of your tips earlier about about mapping out challenges and accomplishments can help you figure out, well, what is the hook, and then start with it. That's the most interesting part. If the hook isn't good, then no one's going to read 3 paragraphs to get to it.
I agree. And play with the emotions. As humans, the only way you can connect with me as a human being is when you play out with my emotions. You play out with my good memories, not bad memories, and especially with sustainability. It doesn't relate to everyone. So if you talk to me when I was in Sudan, I would not have felt climate change the way I'm feeling it here, for example. So my advice is make it a positive story and play with the values of the person in front of you. So to give you an example, we wanted to roll out an ESG campaign for a client, and they completely rechanged their business model to reflect that. And they said, okay, so we've done all of that. How do we relate to our employees? How do we bring our employees with us in this journey? So we teamed up with the HR department, and we embedded one of the questions were, which of our corporate values resonate with you? And we've only asked them to choose their top 2 out of the 4. And based on the top values, we actually designed the comms messaging to talk about these values, because we knew that the people in front of us will relate to the values. And that's how we succeeded in bringing them along. Play with the values, the emotions, the lovely memories that they have. The hook is definitely there. But these are my tips when it comes to messaging.
Can I just build on your point? Just because you said positive, and I do think that our audiences turn off from over-positivity and spin. So if we could make it constructive so that they can see that we're telling an authentic story and the truth. Because if we tell them something's amazing, they automatically won't believe us. So kind of show how amazing it is, don't tell them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So can we actually use storytelling also for the bad stories? You said not only the positive. So how are we going to do that?
Yeah, well, on the flip side of positive is no-brainer, negative. And negative emotions are almost twice as strong as positive feelings. So I do think there is a place for, I guess maybe we're using the word negative in the wrong way, because negative emotions are things like anger and fear. So not necessarily like, oh, negative, I'm a Debbie Downer, but I mean, we're tapping into different emotions. And I do think in some cases there is a place for that. So if I am trying to right an injustice or galvanize, then I might tap into anger, I don't think we should tap into fear ever. I think fear-mongering is really irresponsible, but I think it's okay to tap into things like anger. I think it's okay to tap into things like sadness and remorse, because those have a place too. It just depends on, what outcome it is that we want. If I'm tap into sadness, it's probably because I want to get to compassion, which then leads to action. If I tap into anger, again, it's because I want to galvanize people, get some ears on it, some eyes on it, and again, motivate that action. So I do think there's a place and time for those emotions in your storytelling.
Yeah, and remember, some of the greatest speeches ever, I Have a Dream, they were stubbornly optimistic. So they weren't positive, they were strong and stubborn and constructive.
But then don't you think, for us from a survival point of view, we are mechanically designed to protect ourselves from sadness, because it's part of our survival mechanism, is that, okay, so for example, if you look at the campaigns by Greenpeace, has anyone seen the one with Boris and the plastic drowning the White House, not the White House, what are we talking? Number 10, has anyone seen that campaign? Please raise your hand so I can, if not, I can explain it. So it's literally a campaign that Greenpeace have created, and don't get me wrong, I love Greenpeace. I just don't agree with their approach to storytelling. They created this campaign, please check it out. It's about showcasing how the plastic of the UK is drowning number 10. And it's a very emotional campaign, an ad campaign. But the problem with me as a human being, I will relate to this. I'll probably cry, which I have, because I could see the impact on my people in Sudan on it. But what I did is after I finished, from a survival point of view, I had to cancel it. I had to survive. So I went back to normality. So from a behavioral science, do you agree that we are wired to forget and survive by blocking these sad and shocking information?
That's an interesting question.
See, I need to take your job.
I don't know that I would 100% agree with that, because I think, negative emotions like that, if we blocked them out, we would probably not last very long, because they give us really critical information about our environment. So I do think there is a place and a time for that. In terms of whether we forget it, I wouldn't say that we do. I think we compartmentalize. It's very easy to actively not think about something, but I think that that's different than forgetting about something.
I think that's possibly why the story of Ukraine right now is still as prevalent as it is, because it's horrific, right? It's so sad. But they are telling stories as part of that. And Zelensky is the hero of that story, right? And will be remembered forever. And I just think they might have been slightly more forgotten about if they hadn't told the story and tugged at your heartstrings with those individual stories, the people that you remember.
Do you think there's stories that shouldn't be told? Like, do you think there's any boundaries for storytelling? Any topics?
Badly written stories. Please don't tell those. Come and see me.
No, I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a place for everything. It just needs to be well written.
Yeah, and well told.
Well told.
Touché.
Thank you very much. We have some minutes left, and I would like to ask the audience if you have questions to this amazing panel. Yes, over there. Do we have a microphone here? I can also jump down and come to you and give you mine. It's maybe faster.
Hi, thank you so much for that. That was a really interesting panel discussion, so thank you. So I'm Delia, I work in a law firm, quite new to that, with my colleague Tom here. He'll be embarrassed that I've introduced him as well. It's just, I totally believe in storytelling, and we're trying to introduce it more at the law firm we work for, DWF. But some challenges, and hopefully all of my comms colleagues around the table here, as it were, may agree with this, that it sometimes can be hard to convince leaders to let you tell stories without dumbing down on the stories that they need to tell. We've had a sort of very recent example of that with our head of HR, where we tried to help her to tell a story, bring something alive, make it personal. And unfortunately, it didn't get the feedback we wanted, and so it lost some of its personality. Obviously, we've got a journey to go on. I think it's the same with things like introducing smart brevity to make our communications kind of more pithy, more accessible for our employees. But I just wondered what your tips are for trying to encourage advocacy amongst leadership teams, wherever you work, to embrace storytelling in the way that it should be embraced.
Have you asked them to tell their story?
It's early days for me, but probably I'm the first 90 days, but no, I don't, Tom. No. So that's probably a top tip there.
Massage the ego. And then, I think that's a really good way of getting them to see the power of other people's stories. But if they're not ready, and if they're not in that place, then you kind of have to unleash your inner journalist, get your nose out, find the stories within your organisation that are going to hit them between the eyes. And once you start telling those, and they see that it's a safe place to tell those stories, and it's okay to tell those stories, then they'll be more willing, and all of a sudden they'll be like, oh, this is how I get respect in my business. Okay, I'm on board.
Brill. Thank you very much.
Do we have any more questions?
Oh, there's one behind you.
Sorry.
You see anything, it's like we're backlit.
Hi.
I like a hawk.
Always been sold on storytelling. What I struggle with is I don't get a lot of opportunities to do it. A lot of the comms, I'm sure we're all the same, are operational, informational. Try telling a story about the performance management process that you've got to send an update about. So it's, I mean, I could, I'm sure we could all do that exercise and say, yes, we can get a protagonist and we can do these things, but I suppose I'm struggling with when do I get the chance to do this as much as I would like. I can see how it works live. I can see sometimes I get editorial space, but so much of what I produce day to day, I'm struggling to see how I can use it. I wondered if you had any advice or tips.
Can I go again? It's interesting. I had one of these recently with a company who came to me with a story about process improvements, and I was like, ooh, sexy times. But actually, right, the story was about there were 37 steps to sign off a bolt in this business, right? It's high engineering business, 37 steps. And so the story wasn't really about the process improvement because no one else in the organization cares about that except the engineers. The story's about kind of how the organization is simplifying, and you can find those voices and people can share their passion and their expertise on simplifying the 37-step process down to 5. I think there are heroes to be found, and I hear what you're saying about performance management frameworks. I really do. Let me think more on that one. But I do think there are hidden stories, and people, when they get passionate about their chosen area of expertise, can sometimes hit you with some blinders.
And by the way, stories don't need to really relate to what you're trying to say. So for example, the performance management process. It's a process that increases your performance. So it makes you a better person, a better worker, a better organization. So you can easily twist it in a way that it's not dry and humanize it. By thinking of it, it's a process of going and buying apples. You go from A to B, and once you get this apple, you're going to eat it, and you're going to be healthy. So don't be overwhelmed by the technicalities of what you need to communicate. Think about what is the impact that you want to have or the outcome of this technicality. So I am the queen of being given things to communicate that is the most boring things ever. So for example, I was working for one of the banks, and my job was to communicate. I was interim head of governance and compliance communications. My job was to sexify that one. Yeah, good luck. Okay, it really took a while for me, but then I realized I'm not gonna win if I make it so technical. So what I did is I humanized it. I created the bank as if it's my house, and it's my role as an employee to protect this house. And the way you're going to protect the house is by having an alarm here and an alarm there, things like that. And this is how I was able to explain what the bank was trying to do.
And the power of illustration that can go with that messaging. We did a campaign for the co-op years and years ago, but it was about insurance at Christmas, and we called it Protect Your Presents, and had like Santa on a roof, like with a jetpack on his back, completely illustrated, and the house was burning down, and all of a sudden it wasn't just a story about insurance at Christmas, it was protect your presents, and suddenly there was a hook.
And it was Santa's an arson?
Oh, was there?
Oh, I just didn't know Santa was an arsonist.
Oh, okay. I thought that's how you did it. Okay.
Well, see, we all make meaning, right? Like, we make different meaning from the same story sometimes, and I think that's what's so fascinating.
Yeah, so that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
Amazing. So the time is almost up. So what we learned today is actually be brave enough to use stories. Don't be overwhelmed by technicality. Start with your own story, and don't forget the emotions. Be brave also to use your emotions. Would you like to add anything? What's the takeaway message for the audience now?
You know who is the best storytellers in our in our domain, if you are lucky enough? Children. Genuinely, I need you to stop every now and then and listen to a child telling you a story. It hooks you up because it's so detailed, it's so animated, it's so clear. Listen to children more and adapt the way they're telling you the story. And you'll be very happy in your work.
On the spot, but basically, before I write any story, I always ask myself, will my reader care? And if I can't make myself care enough about it, then it's not a story worth writing. So you have to put yourself in the shoes of your audience. Ask what's in it for them, because if you can make them care, you can make them act. And if you can make them act, you can make them share. And the story just broadens across your business and suddenly becomes, a story that everybody knows, like the 34th floor.
I'll just build on your point. So part of that making them care is really figuring out where your story plot hooks are, because one of the reasons storytelling is such an effective medium for all the reasons we've talked about today, but also is that it's kind of a mystery, right? Like we want to know how the story ends. So I think as you're reading it along, if you've got those plot points and those turns where you're keeping them just enough hooked and just enough mystery, we're going to keep reading so that we can get to the end, because we need to know how it ends.
Or in my case, I just want to put my child to bed and I want her to stop talking. That's exactly what I want to achieve every night.
All right, thank you so much. Time is unfortunately up, but I guess you're going to be around also tonight, as we heard in the
You owe me 2
reception.
drinks, yes.
I don't forget about that. Thank you so much to Elle, to Lindsay, and to Jhin, and thank you.
Bye, thank you.